Welcome to this edition of VLSI Insiders. I'm Dan Hutchison.
I'm Andrea Aliati.
And we're going to be talking about why VLSI is forecasting a recession in 2023, 2024. We've been getting that question all over. For us, it's sort of a natural. So we're going to talk about why we're forecasting it. We think it has to happen. There has to be a slowdown at some point, right, Andrea?
Yes.
So, we've been growing at, the kind of growth rates we've seen more recently of the 35% last year of equipment and 26% in semiconductors. If that continues, the semiconductor industry will have $1 trillion really quickly, and so will the equipment market, right?
Yes, that 2030 forecast will prove to be very pessimistic, actually, at this kind of growth rates that we're running right now.
Yeah, so I mean, we're laughing, but it's very serious business here. But let's just go look at the historical growth rates of what's been going on in the industry. So this is a slide from our most recent TCI graphics file. You can see the growth rates. And one of the things, many of you may not recall this, but back in 2015, I was projecting that unless we had 450 millimeter, we would start to see a general increase in the equipment market because the 300 millimeter holiday would be over. And as we get two things. One is the huge peak in Y2K. You could see it as $56 billion there. And 31% then in the early 2000s, 300 millimeter came along, right, Andrea?
Yes.
Yeah, and then what happened was the equipment market stalled because 300 millimeter was increasing productivity at the leading edge, plus all of the 200 millimeter equipment was being sloughed off, right?
Yes, there was a big conversion actually, and especially in the memory. I mean, there was this huge amount of 200 millimeter from memory market actually that rolled into the let's call it logic and analog. So there was a lot going on during those years. And as you can see there, actually the capital intensity declined quite a bit, especially compared to 2000. And again, the productivity gains were immense, especially from the 300, but they can only get you so far, right?
Yeah, and look, it hits a low of 13% in 2009. And that was coming off the Asian financial crisis, admittedly, or not the Asian one. That's the
Great Recession.
The Great Recession, got down to 13%. Well, really, what happens after that is that we start by 2015. We start to see that the used 200 millimeter equipment market has dried up, and they become really scarce, and those prices start to rise. And we start to see companies like TI. Doing analog fabs with 300 millimeter tools, right?
Yes.
So, but it takes all the way to 2017 for the industry to pass the $56 billion, 17 years to pass the $56 billion of 2000. You can also see why the equipment industry didn't want to do 450 millimeter, because they would have never recovered from the growth would have never recovered, right?
Yes. Yes, and actually it's interesting because we got very close in 2007 and also in even 2011, but again, we didn't cross that 2000 level of $56 billion, which was quite remarkable because 17 years is a very long time.
Yeah, and then, you think about it, right? So now the question becomes, okay, so I might have projected that 7 years ago in 2015 that we would have a rise in the equipment market due to 450 not happening. But now we're here and we're 28% this year. That's what you're projecting, your models are projecting. So have we gone too far?
Well, I think that we're a little bit on the higher side, but again, this thing is never linear like would like to be. So I think it's going to be very lumpy, but you're absolutely right. The trend of higher capital intensity is occurring. It's trending higher. And of course, it's not going to be in a linear fashion. We're going to get some years that's going to be very high, and then it's probably going to, pull back in certain years or following years. And I think what we're seeing right now is a pretty high level, actually. And we've always viewed that 20 to 25% being a pretty normal range for the capital intensity. Most likely it's going to be close to that 25%, in my opinion. And clearly we're a little bit over that at this point. But I think at that 25% or so, it is actually, feasible for the industry to continue to grow and also invest at the leading edge.
Yeah, and so that kind of gets us to the point of where we are right now in the semiconductor industry, because we just saw last week that TSMC was going to spend, what, $44 billion?
About 44 billion, yes, which is a huge, huge number. And
in a single year.
yes. Yeah, it was quite remarkable, though in a way it was expected, because if you look at their plan, they were planning to do about $35 billion this year. However, they're adding more, building new fabs in Japan, and also there is probably going to be another fab in Europe. And they were not part of that CapEx that TSMC had a couple of years ago that said they're going to spend 100 billion over 3 years. So this is really an addition to that CapEx.
But the point that I made in last week's Chip Insider that's relevant to this discussion is that at the growth rate that they're ramping their CapEx in recent years, they will be 100% or more of the equipment industry by the end of the decade, or of equipment consumption, excuse me.
Correct.
They'll be the only ones buying equipment, and the only ones making semiconductors, I guess. And that's not going to happen, right? But so that tells you that at that level, that has to be scaled back. But let's look at the semiconductor industry real quick. So what I want to go to is from Semiconductor Analytics, the overheated or underheated slides, because if we start off with where we are in the last 2 weeks, which is the orange line there, that's 2022, you can see that we're not nearly as hot as we were in 2021 when the shortage hit. Mm-hmm. We're actually tracking closer to 2020, the beginning of 2020, which was, when COVID was just starting. We're well above the 10-year average, but the growth has been slowing substantially. And if you look at this other slide that I like to use in all my presentations, you can see that we hit a 33% growth peak on the 2nd of July last year, which was just under the 34% peak we saw in 2017, in which we saw a steady decline towards a recession in 2019. So we're a year or two away from a real slowdown. You go back to prior cycles, whenever we overshoot by the native growth of the semiconductor industry is somewhere between 5 and 10%, given the year. When you overshoot by this much, you're going to have a rebound to the underside of that below 0%. So, and then if you want to see that in terms of absolute sales, this is sales in billions of dollars, 13-week moving average for the semiconductor industry. And you can see we're returning back to the trend line at this point, right, Andrea?
Yeah, we are actually. And of course, it's still early in the year. But when I look at this chart, actually, this is quite interesting, because, if we look at the cycle, typically it varies between 2 to 3 years. And we've been actually pulling away from this, trend line in this chart, the gray line, I think it was around April of 2001. So it's been about 8 months, right? So from that perspective, I still think that we're probably going to be above this line, throughout 2022. But then beyond that, I think, we're really stretching that cycle quite a bit. So that's one of the reasons why we are actually predicting a slowdown in 23 for ICs and a slight downturn in 24.
Yeah, and by the way, the x-axis on that is wrong because it's put in there manually, because you can't get a good layout.
Yeah, I had to go actually.
Yeah, it says 2021, but that's actually the beginning of 2022, because I added 2022 to the year, but I didn't fix the axis.
Yes, yes, and actually then I had to go and look at the chart and see really when we started, pulling away from that the trend line, and it was April 21 actually.
Yeah. So anyway, that's when we're going. So that's about it. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we can just kind of close off. You can see that we're, the whole point for a slowdown somewhere out there in the future is that we will revert back to the trend and back to the mean. So, I mean, it's just classic forecasting, reversion to the mean, whether it's the stock market or anything else. And, we've had these great few years here. I remember in 2020, everybody was going, oh, we're going to have a bad downturn because of COVID. And no, because we decoupled, but now we're going to recouple, because the other thing that we haven't talked about is what the Fed's doing. The Fed's going to slow the economy down, right?
Yeah, and as you can see in the last few days, the bond market with the sell-off there, I think the message is clear there, and the question is how quickly the Fed will raise rates and by how much, right? Because they do have an inflation problem. So of course, that's going to create its own problems at the macro level, because there will be, some cooling there for sure.
Hey, well, great. I think we've covered everything on it. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Dan. That was quite interesting.